Thanks for joining us today with our panel in which we'll be focusing on facilitating collaborative product development. My name is Tor Mitchell. I lead the platform team on the product side here at Miro. We've got a great list of panelists today, which I will introduce shortly. But while we wait for everybody to trickle in, we thought a little bit of an icebreaker might be in order. If you take a look in the Zoom chat, you'll see a link there to a Miro board. Open that up, you'll find a map, and we would love to see where you are. So grab a pin, stick it on the map, and let's find out where people are joining us from today. Well, it's great to see so many people getting involved on the board there. Looks like we've got some people from India, we've got some people from Scandinavia, good presence from the US. It's just great to see. So thanks to you all for joining us at such different times of day. I think we can probably get started now. Great, so let's get started. As I mentioned, we've got three great panelists today, Aaron, Paige, and Matt, and I will let them introduce themselves one at a time. I will start with Aaron.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. So my name is Eran Freilich. I'm the head of the design organization in PTC. I have background in development, product management, product experience, and design. Very happy to be here today.
Thanks, Aaron. Paige.
Hi, folks. Lovely to meet you. My name is Paige Costello. I lead the Clarity pillar at Asana. My teams focus on the goal setting, project planning, and work tracking interfaces that help teams get work done together. Before I was at Asana, I worked at Intercom and Intuit. I've been in product management my whole career.
Great, thank you. And Matt.
Great. Hey, I'm Matt Horan. I'm a software engineer at Spotify. I am part of our internal consultancy program. We go around to engineers throughout Spotify and help them leverage tools and technologies that help them build quicker and release better software. I've been building platforms and working on this type of thing for a long time. So I'm excited to chat about this with the rest of the team here.
Fantastic. Well, welcome, and thanks to you all for joining us today. I think before we start, it would be helpful just to give our audience a bit of context on your teams. So how you structure your teams, kind of their size, the roles within those teams, where they're based. Are they, do they have people who are working remote in them? Obviously, we all are now, but under normal circumstances. And also, kind of how do you divide up kind of the development work between your different teams? What have you used in terms of the sort of division of responsibilities in that way? So yeah, let's start with Aaron.
Okay, so in PTC we have multiple business units. We call them segments. My design organization is a combination between centralized team reporting up to me and dotted line teams which reports to each segment. So we have a design organization within each of our business units, and we all look at the design we look at the user first, so we have a kind of a cross-segment view from a design perspective. We build design system to serve the entire organization, and we build specific apps or products to serve our users for the different segments. My team is a global team. Even before the pandemic, we were working kind of remotely, and we have teams in Israel, in the US, in few locations, and so forth. So we kind of almost got used to working remote before the pandemic, but this is obviously now everyone is working remotely. The work from the development perspective, we have two different levels of how we split the work. First, we have our segment prioritization. So the product of each of the segments, each of the business units define their own prioritization. So that's number one of how the team will focus, what the team will focus on. The second thing is, what do we need to do as a cross kind of products? What from a user perspective who are using more than one PTC product, how can we serve them better? And what is the cross-segment strategy projects that we want to do? So that's another part of the team that we are working on.
Great, thank you. Paige, how about your teams?
Yeah, absolutely. Asana builds its products in Vancouver, San Francisco, and New York. Most of our teams are in the office, but we do have a couple people here and there who work remotely until we were all working remotely. The way we organize our teams is effectively pillars and then areas or subgroups within those that are focused on customer outcomes or jobs to be done. And then within those, smaller program teams. And the program teams typically range from 5 to 12 engineers, and it's a group that's really cross-functional. So we often have a researcher, a PM, a designer, an engineering manager, someone who's a tech or program lead. And they focus on their team mission. They have a North Star metric, but they're also really connected into the strategic plans of the area, the pillar, and our company as a whole. So you need that whole stack to connect the dots between our teams, but that's how we're organized today.
Sounds good. How about yourself, Matt?
Yeah, great. So Spotify is very much a global company. We have offices around the world, but engineering has historically been pretty centered in Sweden, the UK a bit, New York and Boston, a few folks here and there. Now, recently we announced that we have a work from anywhere policy, so that'll be opening up a bit more. And of course, for the last year, we've all been working remotely. I'm pretty new to Spotify. I've only been here for about 9 months, but it's been a smooth transition to remote for me. In terms of like the way our teams are structured, we have a few levels there. So we do have business units, but they don't mean too much on the day-to-day. We're broken down into what we call missions, tribes, and squads. Missions are a collection of interrelated tribes that are working on kind of a common mission. Tribes are a collection of squads or just teams that are all working on the day-to-day work to deliver on OKRs and such. Very similar to how Paige described things at Asana. We have these high-level company goals that get broken down at the mission level, and then tribe leads, as we call them, work with the squads within their tribe to kind of hand those out. And so everybody kind of picks and chooses, what they're working on, and then every team is enabled to execute autonomously against those goals. And so just like at Asana, we get a PM, an engineering manager, a designer, maybe a data engineer, an ML engineer, and you all go and build what you need to in order to deliver a product. So it's a different way of working for me, but it's been really exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah, it sounds interesting. Of course, Spotify are often referred to as the sort of the prototypical model almost for many teams now. So it's interesting to hear that many elements of what people often refer to as the Spotify model are still going strong. So I mean, given the structures you've just described and how your teams are distributed, are there specific challenges that you've experienced in facilitating collaboration, and how have you kind of mitigated those challenges? Erin?
Sure. So from a collaboration perspective, I would say I have two main categories of collaboration. One of them is within the design organization. Because we have designers in each of these different products, we have to make them collaborate to make a persistent user experience and consistent user experience. So there's a lot of collaboration in this level within the team. The other type of collaboration, we are doing a lot of user-centered design and a lot of, getting more agile maturity. And when you think about agile maturity, it's all about transparency and collaboration. So when we are doing definition of a product, we have to have sales, tech support, development, product, design all together in a workshop or collaboration. And that's the other level of collaboration. How do we bring cross-functions team into one room or virtual room today and collaborate on making the right choices for our users? So those were the challenges. And obviously, when you're not in the same room, there are challenges, right? People you miss the interaction, you miss the whiteboard and so forth. One of the things that we discovered is the digital whiteboard. We started with Miro as a whiteboard, but very fast we moved from use of a whiteboard to use of how do we incorporate our best practice? How do we put the information as persistent? How do we use Miro to have transparency to the rest of the organization of what's going on in the product? So those was some of the challenges that we have overcome with tools like that we use today. Obviously, there are other channels that we use like Slack and other things to get teams closer to each other, although they are very remote. One thing is interesting is even before the pandemic, because we had global teams, we had a situation that we have 5 people in one location and 5 people in another location. So it's kind of semi-remote, and we overcome it with the same kind of technologies, making everyone feel they are in the same virtual room.
Sounds good, and great to hear Miro is being helpful, and we didn't even ask you to say that.
That's true.
Paige or Matt, anything you'd like to add to that? Okay, I know Matt, I think you mentioned sort of autonomy as being a very important factor in kind of facilitating, like especially when you've got heavily distributed teams and you don't necessarily have your product and engineering leadership co-located in the same location. So autonomy is one of those things that people talk about a lot and aspire to, but feels like it's actually very difficult to get to that point. I'm interested to hear kind of your experiences across your different teams in terms of how you've achieved that, and also how you maintain it, which I think people don't really talk about as much. Paige, is that something that you've had to tackle?
Oh yeah. We have a value at Asana that's called reject false trade-offs. And so this is this general belief that we have that if something sounds like oppositional or black and white, there's probably more likely than not, there's a gray area, and there's not a compromise, but a different point of view that could be the solution. And so when I hear this positioning around autonomy versus direction or autonomy versus focus, I'm not sure they're actually at odds. The way I think about this is actually we recently last year built a goals solution on top of Asana because we realized that we were trying to build a tool that would help teams collaborate and have clarity of plan. Who's doing what by when has long been what we've been up to. But we hadn't really thought about who's doing what by when and why. And why actually creates much more immediate alignment and intuition around the goal. If you understand why you're doing something, you can make better local choices, which increases autonomy. So actually having very clear goals helps your teams move faster, make the right trade-offs, and know what path to take to get to their destination. So when I think about autonomy and I think about focus, I actually think it's really important to have that cascade of like, what's our mission? What are our strategic objectives? What are our goals? And then the teams are like, maybe the leaders at your company are assembling and aware of the portfolios of work. And then you've got projects that your teams are driving, and then the tasks within each of those projects. But you know, I spoke to this PM at Figma, and they said something that really resonated with me. And they said that Asana builds trust within and between teams, and that we know when things are due and who's going to deliver on them. We can hold each other accountable. It's trust that's critical to a team's success. And so when I think about trust and autonomy, it's like, how can you get out of each other's hair? How can you get out of the weeds and just not have to say, are you doing this? Or is this going to be done by Thursday? You've got a coordination system to enable that. So when I think about autonomy, I really think about goals and clarity of plan, because that's how you can get in, get out, and get back to work in a way that helps everyone productively work together.
Yeah, it's interesting. I always think trust is the critical factor when it comes to autonomy. And I've seen teams, particularly on the product side, there's a lot of sort of literature around autonomy. The sort of you often hear people like Marty Kagan talking about the importance of autonomy, but it's so heavily dependent on trust. And so you have teams that have maybe read a lot of that literature and sort of expect to demand autonomy, or are frustrated they don't have autonomy. And what I say to them is, well, you can't demand to be trusted. You have to earn trust.
Yes.
So I'm interested,
Yeah.
whether across the three of you, whether you've have any, when you're coaching your teams, how do you help them build that trust in order to achieve that autonomy?
I actually just read something from our board member, Anne Raimondi, about trust that was completely eye-opening. She shared an equation for trust. And the equation she shared was trust equals credibility plus reliability plus authenticity divided by self-interest. And then she broke down each of those. And I was like, what? That's brilliant. Because if you think about the times when you weren't trusted or you didn't trust a team, there are often different reasons. It might be like, how credible are they in the work that they do and their knowledge base? How reliable are they? Like, what is their say-do ratio? If you ask, or if they volunteer to do something, does it get done? Authenticity, like, do you know who this person is and how they're operating and have that level of understanding of who they are, over this notion of self-interest, because that's where the office politics play in. And then suddenly you don't trust someone because you're like, yeah, that's what they're saying, but I know why they're really doing it, right? So that blew my mind as an equation for trust: credibility plus reliability plus authenticity over self-interest. And I've been thinking about it and using it as I coach people in their career growth. And I coach our teams about how to have increasing levels of autonomy.
It feels like there's a subtext there as well, which is that, like, authenticity in particular often comes from vulnerability almost, or being willing to be vulnerable. And that in turn relies on a certain degree of psychological safety culturally. So I'm interested, again, like Spotify is often referenced as a kind of cultural, a place that really invests heavily in culture. So how do you go about creating that environment of psychological safety within the teams in order to put the building blocks in place for this kind of model?
Yeah, totally. This is like front and center for me, both before I joined Spotify and since. And it's been great for me to come to another company that was aligned with my previous thoughts on psychological safety, because I do think it really it is a multiplier on team effectiveness. If people feel like they can say, you know what, I don't know, or you know what, I can make a mistake, like that's great. I remember, a few years ago, there was like a big service outage that blew up on the internet, and people were talking about, well, we got to find the person who, committed that line of code and like get them fired, right? And like, that's completely the wrong thing, to do. Me as previously a manager and now just in a tech leadership role, like, well, I take the blame, but I help the team, learn from the mistake, right? And so that culture of like psychological safety and just feeling okay, not knowing or asking for help is really important. And so I lead by example, in that regard.
Yeah, if I may add, I think there's additional things in trust, and one of them, or something that we try to do in our team, is to be comfortable to give feedback and to get feedback. Because if you get feedback from someone and you don't, and you begin to get kind of a trust issues unless you're comfortable with the feedback. And the one thing that we keep, emphasizing is it's okay, as Matt said, it's okay to fail. Fail fast is better, but it's okay to fail, because we don't know everything. We need to understand that we don't know everything. And in order to overcome that, we are doing more collaboration. We ask more subject matter experts their opinion. And now you build more trust with these teams because they are part of your product development. They are part of it. They are part of the decision making. And then we go to our users and ask them, what do they think about what we're going to develop or what we have developed? And now it's not my opinion against your opinion, it's the users. And you know what? Sometimes we got it right and sometimes we need to change, and it's okay. And that's the kind of thing we try to do in the design team and across the board with our methodologies to build this trust and transparency.
Yeah, and I can definitely, so the idea of sort of celebrating failure resonates with me. I've seen that as actually a fairly effective icebreaker exercise for meetups and unconferences and things like that, is where people are asked to share stories of failure, and then when they finish, everybody cheers and claps and sort of celebrates that as having been a learning opportunity. So I think that's great. Excellent. Okay, so I suppose the obvious question to ask, having talked about this in sort of broader sense, is about this year. So I'm interested to sort of what changes you've seen in how your teams work together, even teams that were already functioning well, or even teams perhaps that have been that have a remote element already, but the sort of the environment and the pressures and the sort of just the general strangeness of the last 12 months. I'm interested in to see kind of how that's changed the way that your teams have been functioning, and whether you've had to sort of have to make any interventions to keep them supported in that way. But also the flip side, have there been any things that actually have been better, or that things that have surprised you, lessons you've learned that you would like to carry forward? Erin, do you want to take that one?
Sure, and then I think it's interesting. One of the things that the advantages, if I can call it advantages, is that we learn to know each other better in the team, because suddenly we see everyone in their home, right? We didn't go to people's home before, but now we see their home. Now it's okay to hear kids in the background. It used to be unprofessional if you get into a call and your kid is screaming in the background. I have 3 kids that are learning from home now. I'm sure they're going to jump in sometimes in this panel, and people are okay with that. You get more to know your team better. You get to know your peers better, and I think this was an interesting thing. We also saw more people opening the webcams. People were not comfortable before they open. Now everyone is opening the webcam. Now you can see them, you can talk with them, even though you're remote. So these are the good things that happen. I do think that you can never replace the human interaction. So people needs to stand next to each other and put something on the whiteboard. That's something that I hope that we'll get back very fast. But that's the kind of thing that we need to. Even with all the tools and with all the help, we still need to have this kind of human interaction to get things done better. That's the thing.
Yes, it's interesting. I notwithstanding this conversation, I've actually kind of resisted the temptation to use Zoom backgrounds, because I feel like actually, if we're talking about authenticity, showing people where you are, and I realize I'm fortunate, I've got a private space in which to work, and so I have that luxury. But for what it's worth, I think as a matter of principle, this is where I am. And I think that's that does help definitely make you feel a little bit more connected.
I absolutely agree with that. I'm thinking about this question, and there's something about kind of what you noticed early going remote as a whole company really suddenly. And I think for us, one of the big things was remote onboarding. We onboarded more than 450 employees since March of last year. And onboarding people remotely is a beast. And luckily, we had a system in place that already was like, fire off these tasks, introduce these people in these ways, help them understand and complete their onboarding materials. But what we maybe didn't see was our habits and operating rhythms, the process, that we run to do product reviews or to, set our KRs, was a bit more opaque than we thought it was. And so we created, we've been more intentional about creating these projects with, the annual, the half year, the quarterly, the monthly cadences, so that you can see, here are the recurring things that we do at a pillar level or area level or a team level, so that someone joining can quickly get their bearings and really understand how do we work? How do we operate? And so I think that that's a change that we'll definitely keep, is that process and operating rhythm transparency.
I'm particularly curious, Matt, you mentioned that Spotify have announced that if I understood correctly, that teams will be allowed to work remotely, from now on. How has that changed because it feels like we have had similar challenges to Paige in terms of how we onboard and things like that. But there's always been this sense that, oh, this is just a temporary solution, right? Like at some point we'll go back to the way things were. Now that you've kind of embraced that this is the new normal, has that changed kind of the way that you're thinking about some of these challenges, because they're now much more long-term challenges?
Yeah, totally. For me, I joined Spotify 3 months into the pandemic. So I guess fortunately they like already worked out a few of the kinks in onboarding, but they even before that, there was a very elaborate onboarding experience, basically for all disciplines, specifically engineering, but everybody else. So I think that's good. We had a leg up, and so yeah, there were a few bumps in the road, like how to get started. But for me, it was surprisingly smooth. I felt like I was able to jump right in and be on the team and kind of push that forward. So I think we learned a lot, and we'll continue to reflect on that and continue to do that going forward. But tools like Miro and just like all these collaborative, like cloud-based things that we can get together and like share our screens, like they're imperative to be doing this. Just get everybody in a room, right, to have a conversation. Well, we can't do that anymore. And I actually think that by forcing our hand at becoming remote first, we've gotten better, right? We've had teams around the world, but they've maybe been able to get in a room and work together really easily. But now, now that we can't do that, like, yeah, maybe I'll grab a coffee with a coworker down the street, like every now and then, but that's it. Like all the planning happens online. And I think that's gone really well because we can all get together. We all have time and space to share our ideas and can collaborate, I think, even more effectively than when you're in a room and like maybe the loud person speaks up a lot more. Like it kind of changes the dynamic, which is really interesting for the leveling the playing field.
We had another interesting change. We because of the pandemic, we changed the way that we're doing user research. So in the past, we went to in person and talk with people. We couldn't do that. So what we tried the first time last year, and that's something that we're going to repeat, is a virtual event. In 3 days, we met with 200 users for usability tests. And we asked everyone from around the globe, and we had it actually 24 hours because we had teams in all over the place. So we had usability tests at night, in the morning, and so forth. And what we learn from that is that we get a lot of value from that. And it's not easy, but it's something that we can repeat. And what we're starting to do is what we call a research fair, which every month we're going to do a mini event like that. And we're going to have a few dozens of users coming and doing this usability test and supporting the entire product organization. So that's something we definitely learn from, and we're going to continue to do going forward.
Excellent, great. Well, it'd be interesting to hear from the audience as well. If you look at that same board that we referenced earlier, which will be posted back in the chat in a second, there's a section on there alongside the Q&A section where we'd love to hear from you about kind of what are the things that you've liked or that's worked well about being remote and that you would like to preserve and carry forward, even if you do decide to head back to the office, hopefully later this year.
I think no matter what, there has been an acceleration in tool adoption. Like that, I would say that this has really changed people's awareness. Like you were kind of discussing like coffee or water cooler chats and how you get status and how you know who's doing what and what's happening. Like I think there are 1.25 billion knowledge workers, and most of them, like only 97% of them don't have a tool that they would say is for collaboration and coordination. Like they have communication tools like Slack and email, they have content tools like Google Docs, but the actual like, how are we deciding on the plan and what is happening is fulfilled right now through like vertical specific tools, through spreadsheets, and through things that really are pretty inflexible cross organization and don't scale. So I'm excited that this move to remote work made people reconsider their default modes of working and how they get information from other people and the amount of work it takes to get that information. I think we became less patient with being in status meetings. like once you're in Zoom calls all day, you ask yourself, am I doing the strategic high value work, or am I doing work about work, where I'm updating on the status and I'm doing the thing that I really wish you just knew so that we didn't have to talk about?
Yeah, it definitely resonates with me. I think, from Miro's perspective, we obviously, there's no denying the pandemic has been an accelerant to the business. And part of that is because people just sort of started out with, we don't have a whiteboard anymore. Like, what are we going to do? Like there is so many processes that just were based around that metaphor, if you like. But actually what's interesting for us then is, well, where do you go from there, right? Like once you've got a digital online whiteboard, what does that mean in terms of how can that be better and more than the kind of the physical alternative? So yeah, it's interesting times, definitely. Excellent. Okay, so I mean, I think you mentioned, Paige, that you'd hired, I think, did you say 600 people? Something like that.
More than 450.
Sorry,
which is still a lot.
Yeah. And I think for Miro, it's something like something similar. Actually, I don't know the exact numbers, but it's that kind of order of magnitude. So we talked about onboarding, but there's just also the overall processes, like how do they scale, and how have you had to evolve your kind of methodology to handle the communications overheads of that many people and the alignment challenges of that many people?
Yeah. I feel like my answer here is going to feel like a cop-out because we already were so heavily using Asana that we don't even use email at Asana internally. We only structure communication around the work itself, which is a very, we have Slack for informal, casual conversations. We use email for external communication and some Google Docs for long form writing. Everything else is in Asana. And so that means that the habits and processes we run are often like automations where a manager will know hey, by the end of the week, I want my whole team to make sure that they've set their goals and that we have an opportunity to review them. And so that actually tees up okay, there are automatically these subtasks assigned to the team with a due date. And then once they're completed, this admin gets added and we get the 50-minute, the time scheduled so that we can review it as a team. That sort of process alignment and completion and kind of that very rich expectation of the team happens in a more systematic way. And it always has, but we've been bumping up the clarity of expectations, I would say. So when I talked earlier about process transparency and really making sure people know okay, every 6 months we set a directional roadmap, and then every quarter we set our KRs, and every 6 weeks people just have a cycle goal that they articulate, get XYZ to dog fooding, and it's either hit or it's missed. Those sorts of things are easy to tap into because it's right there. You can see this is the thing. There's only one owner. Accountability is one person, and then everyone else can follow along. So I would say that our shift in process hasn't been that dramatic because we've been such heavy users of the tool.
How about you, Aaron? Have you had to adapt your processes as you've grown?
So we are a global company, so very similar to what Paige was saying. We already had processes in place to overcome the remote people that in the team. I think what we did is we kind of move in the maturity of how we capture the information. So if before we can have two people standing next to each other writing something on the whiteboard, we changed the whiteboard is not being wiped out at the end of the day, but you have to make it persistent, right? So we want to use the tools to make this information persistent so you can follow up the next day, because the next day you need to continue the discussion. So I think we made improvement of the way that we keep the information and make it more available for other people. For example, whiteboard, if you look at the whiteboard, if you're not in the meeting and you look at the whiteboard, you cannot make sense what's written there, right? It's a mess, and only the people in the meeting. So in order to overcome that, we use a little bit more templates, right? So people know how to read the whiteboard. So we use more templates into our processes and so forth. But that was the main changes that I feel in the process, because we were already a global company working remotely.
And have you found any other tooling has been particularly helpful? You know, we touched on Miro, we've touched on Asana at Asana, but is there anything else that's been sort of emerged over the last 12 months that you now wonder how you ever lived without?
I don't know if I wonder about that, but Microsoft Teams is something that we use. We use Zoom as well, depends on the amount of people in the meeting. So Microsoft Teams became our #1 tool today, right? You start your day with Microsoft Teams and you end your day with Microsoft Teams, because you keep doing this kind of remote session. I would go back to working with people, close to them, and that's why I wouldn't say I would give it up, but that was the main thing. And we keep more information using Teams, and we keep more information using Miro. I think the content management became much more important right now because of this kind of work that we have to do.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you say that, it makes me think about, we actually didn't use digital whiteboarding tools at all before we went remote. Maybe an individual would, to like dump their own ideas and rearrange and cluster and think, or do research synthesis, but it really wasn't used in the same collaborative way I'm seeing right now. We use tools like Miro for brainstorming and visioning exercises, and we actually have an Asana Miro integration, so that the ideas that are like great and everyone's all excited about don't fall through the cracks, because there's nothing more disappointing than 2 weeks later you're like, man, that was so lovely. What did we decide? Who's doing what? Oh, so yeah, I do think that is a change in the adoption. And what's been fun is you actually do see more people involved in that way. We just had an all hands yesterday, and we had so many more people take the mic, because you don't have that awkward shift of someone walking to the podium and changing computers, like boom, 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 boom. We heard from a lot of people across the business, and it's so satisfying for every team to see their work represented and be a part of the bigger picture. So I would say that there are these big shifts in the tools we're using and in how we, like, what we think is possible.
Yeah. And did that adoption of these tools kind of bubble up from the grassroots, or were these sort of just rolled out across the corporation?
Yeah, grassroots discovery and toying with, but it really takes IT to have a connected strategy and make sure that the whole company is set up for success, especially around cross-team collaboration and tools that aren't just, burrowing into a given silo, but that many people can access and get value out of.
Yeah. And Matt, have you seen particular ways in which IT teams have kind of facilitated that? Again, presumably, if this is becoming the new normal for you, that's become quite essential.
Yeah, totally. So, with like the autonomy that we've talked about already at Spotify, you can basically say, I want to try this thing out, and like, you can give it a shot. We have like a tech procurement team that works pretty closely with my team to help make that stuff happen. But, if you're just going to try something out, like, that's fine. As soon as it's going to start scaling out to the business, we're over 6,000 people, over 3,000 of that in engineering. So, there are some coordinative efforts that have to go into making that happen. But the IT team is super accommodating, you know, and it's amazing because it's like, well, I want to do this. Okay, let's make it happen. So Miro and Asana, I mean, we use it all. We've got Asana here, we've got you know, Jira over there, we've got Trello for this thing, you know, and teams kind of pick and choose the tools and technologies that work for them, and it. You know, you might have to like juggle a few things here or there. I don't know if it's going to be in Asana or if it's in Trello or Jira, and like the integrations there are a little lacking. But at the end of the day, it helps the team move faster, and you know that's what matters the most. And so we really focus on that just individual enablement, and I think that that's just really part of the culture.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Well, at this point, I'd love to turn it over to Q&A. So let's take a look at the board, and we'll see what questions have been asked. We'll let the team screen share that. So just looking at those sort of things that you would keep about remote work in the long term, I think that the real standouts there in terms of things that people voted for were collaboration tools, just as we've discussed, things like Miro and Zoom, flexible working hours and general autonomy over your time. I can definitely empathize with that. Reduced commuting, no surprise there. I used to work in London. I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore. And I mean, a general trend of better work-life balance. So it'd be interesting to see how, you know, I think as teams have realized the benefits of these kinds of work, I think companies are going to have to work harder to create office environments that justify the unavoidable pain of being back in the office. Which is no bad thing. I think you know, encouraging companies to really invest in that environment is can only be a good thing. All right, excellent. So we've got lots of questions here. We may not get through all of them, I'm afraid, but let's have a quick look around the board and see what's received a good number of votes. So one question here, how are you training teams to facilitate meetings and workshops remotely? So that's an interesting question. So actually recognizing that there's a skill in that. Is that something that you've invested in particularly?
So yeah, so I can answer from a design perspective. We're doing a lot of user-centered design, which is involved a lot of brainstorming. So you need to know how to run these meetings. And we believe in democratizing a lot of the activities that we do. We don't think it's only designers can do that or only a specific role. So there's a lot of training, and part of the training is learn by doing. So we want to help the team, so we consult them, or we can help them build a workshop script. And in many cases, we build a template for a workshop. If we know this is something that we keep doing again and again, the same kind of workshops, for example, measurement on your product. How would you measure what's a KPIs? What's a good KPI? You need to have kind of a brainstorming session with teams. So we will create a template for a workshop, and the template will invest the extra time to give the instructions to facilitators. What do you need to do in every action? You're not going to get it as a skilled facilitator who's doing that for his living or her living, but you will get a lot of value from that. And we believe that everyone can run simpler or different advanced workshops. So this is the kind of training we do. We invest in the templates, and we help teams to start the first workshop and so on. But we trust the team to be successful themselves or to learn from their mistakes. That's the kind of things that we do.
Excellent. Okay, so next question. What artifacts and processes have you found most effective at helping teams understand and stay aligned to the why for building autonomy and helping teams make autonomous decisions? Paige, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So something we do is we have a few things that we're doing to achieve this. One is like on the artifact front, we build a plan on a page at almost every level of the organization. And so this isn't crazy unusual. There are a bunch of companies that do this, but effectively, like, what's the mission? And then under that, you've got the like North Star metric, the jobs to be done, and then like the target customer. And that actually looks different at your company than it might look in your like segment or pillar or group or whatever, whatever you're calling that, then your area, then your program team. And what's really powerful about that is it helps you see how the puzzle pieces fit together, but you really need to understand the top of your pyramid clearly in order to do that successfully. So understanding the mission of your company and making sure that everyone really understands that, and then having clear strategic objectives. So, what annually are the top things that you're trying to do as an organization? And then the artifacts often are more organizational under that. But it's important to have the same set of goals at the top of the pyramid. And so we use Asana goals for this, but then the artifacts are often more on that like longer form strategic perspective, so that you have your mission, your strategy, your North Star metric, the jobs to be done, and who you're going after. And that is so clarifying. Even asking a team to write that up, you can see, whoa, you actually think that you should be prioritizing this aspect of the experience. And we had funded this team assuming we'd get more over here. So you can really quickly align on who are we, what are we trying to do? And then it's wonderful for onboarding new team members too, because you just say, welcome, this is your team, this is your area, this is how it all connects, and go here to see your objectives any old time and see how those objectives cascade down into the work that you do day to day, connecting the dots.
We added another level. We're doing very similar thing, but we added another level, which is who is the user and what problem are you trying to solve? Why is it important for our users to solve this problem, and how is that aligned with our business goals and so forth? So it's kind of a matrix to identify that. This is really helping teams to understand the why, because there is a user, there's someone who's going to use our product, and we're actually solving a real problem.
Excellent. Okay, I think we've probably got time for one more question. So this is perhaps a good one for you, Matt, just following on from what you were saying earlier around sort of working with IT teams to roll out these sort of tools. So the question is, how does collaboration occur between the development teams and the IT operations teams? And how are you structured to ensure the right focus? So for example, cloud platform teams or Microsoft Suite teams or integration teams, etc.
Yeah, totally. So my just to talk a little bit about what we do in the platform consultancy and what the platform mission means. Platform is focused on the developer platform for all the developers at Spotify. So that's everything from mobile to running apps in the cloud to Google Cloud, everything like that. So generally, if somebody wants to try something new out, they'll come through us in some way, shape, or form, and we have that tech procurement team, who can help with that. So it is very much a collaborative exercise in figuring out well, if somebody comes to us and says, well, we need a metrics platform, well, first we'll look and see, well, does our existing metrics platform meet that need or not, and then figure out, okay, well, then do we need to buy something else? The same goes for teams that may have been using another technology. One thing that we do with the consultancy that I'm a part of is look at what they're doing today and what they might be able to be doing that's better, right? And so we might be able to move people between technologies, but we're also constantly evaluating that, right? And so we can look at what's working well today, but what might actually work better next week or the week after that. It's the collaboration tools are only a part of it. It's also the day-to-day developer tool suite, which is where I am as a software engineer. But having that collaboration and having a positive working relationship with IT is really important, because it's a give and take, right? We're all trying to achieve that same business goal. And I think to tie it back to the last topic, I'm really impressed with aligning from those top level business goals all the way down through all your teams is super important when you have an autonomous organization. And so I feel like our IT is very much aligned with our business goals, in that we're trying to move our developers forward faster. So everybody's aligned on that goal. Everyone's just moving towards that. And there's very few, some, but very few hiccups in trying to get new technology rolled out quickly.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we are almost out of time. I want to give each of you just an opportunity for a few last words. In particular, do you have any sort of particular recommendations for kind of follow-up content that people could consume to help them learn more about this topic, be it blogs you follow, books you've read, podcasts, and so forth, and any other tips and pointers you can give people who perhaps joined us today who are struggling with some of these challenges? Erin, would you like to kick off?
Sure. So I think be comfortable with using tools, like Miro. You'll see that in the beginning, people are kind of hesitant to use it. They don't always speak, especially in a remote sessions, because when you're in a room, people will be quiet. When you don't see them, they will be even more quiet than that. So try to find facilitation tools that can help you, not just the whiteboard itself, but also the skills and practices, how to run this kind of workshop. Miro itself has tons of templates that you can use, or you can build it yourself. It takes practice to do it the right way. If you think about design thinking or user-centered design, they actually thought about this kind of facilitation long ago. You can take it and mirror it into a remote work environment. This is what we did, and it was working very well for us. Obviously, the company gave us the support, and the leadership executive was very thoughtful of how to run this kind of organization in a remote session. That's very helpful. But at the end of the day, you just mirror the same thing, almost the same thing we did before, to a remote session.
Great, thank you. Paige?
Yeah, I would say really think about rewarding clarity and accountability in your organization. I think people don't always feel comfortable saying, when do we need this by? Or like, okay, but really, who's going to take this? Model that yourself, invite others to do it, write it down, and know that that's actually a relief. Even though no one wants to do it, then you can pass the baton and have more autonomy and control because you just agreed and now you can move forward. I would say that when you have that clarity and accountability, then it frees people up to focus on the real problems they're trying to solve. I cannot plus one enough what Erin said around customer problems. Like, your roadmap should be like the prioritized nature of like, what are the big problems we need to solve that are frequent, painful, and people are willing to pay for seeing them solved, right? So if you know where you're going, then you just want to help people coordinate on the path to that destination and get out of their way as much as possible. And so I think really encouraging the working styles that drive efficiency and that level of autonomy requires accountability and requires clarity. And so I would encourage you to see where are things murky? How can you like break through the ambiguity and create structures of clarity in your organization, in meetings and in the way you operate at an annual level, like truly the whole gamut.
Fantastic, thank you. And Matt, the last word is yours.
All right. Yeah, I want to go back to something that Erin and Paige both touched on earlier, which is, I think this remote situation forced a lot of us, to move what maybe normally was done in a room online and to change our collaboration styles. And I actually feel like that has led to a huge improvement for me personally in like collaborative product development. I've historically felt like, I've got to be in that room where the planning is happening in order to like get my thoughts in, and also like, make sure things are going in, the right direction. It's partly my fault. It's partly organizational. I think I've almost been relieved, I'd say these days, in that I don't feel like I have to be at the meeting, because there's going to be a digital asset that comes out when it's over, and I can comment on it. There's a digital asset, a Miro board or whatever, that I could look at and leave comments on for a period of time. Because now we're accepting of, not everybody can make it to the meeting. People have childcare or whatever that they have to deal with. The other thing is tools like Slack, and moving what were typically water cooler conversations to chat rooms. I'm very much a water cooler conversation kind of person, and I miss it immensely. But the openness and access to information, I think, really changes the dynamic of your organization. And so, not just for me, being able to be a little bit more relieved, it also allows others to get access that they may not have otherwise had, and influence others or product direction in ways that they weren't able to previously. And I think that's incredibly powerful. And I hope that we can continue that, after this. And so I'm excited, particularly of Spotify's approach. And like, well, yes, we'll have some offices, but like, we're also going to need to continue thinking about how to work remotely, because we're embracing that, going forward. So I think this is a really exciting time, despite everything else that the last year has been. And I look forward to seeing how we continue to build these processes.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks so much to all three of you, to Matt, to Paige, to Aaron, for joining us today. It was invaluable to hear your insights.